First sign that my sister's 5-day stay was going to be a special kind of hell wasn't anything my husband said out loud. It was the silence that came off him the moment I told him she was coming. My sister Danny had just left her husband of 4 years. Not dramatically, not with screaming or thrown dishes. She'd come home one Tuesday to find half the furniture gone and a note on the kitchen counter. Just a note. She called me from the parking lot of a CVS because she didn't want to cry inside the empty apartment, and I told her to get in her car and drive to us. No discussion, just come. My husband Ryan was in his home office when I knocked on the door to tell him. He didn't look up from his monitor right away. He finished whatever he was typing first. Then he swiveled his chair, gave me the kind of patient expression a doctor uses before delivering mediocre news, and said, "How long is she thinking?" Not, "Is she okay?" Not, "Of course, whatever she needs." Just, "How long?" I told him 5 days, maybe a week. She just needed to get her footing, figure out what to do about the lease, make some calls. He nodded slowly, like he was running a calculation in his head. "Okay," he said. "Just try to keep it contained, yeah? I have that Patel proposal due Friday." Contained. Like Danny was a small kitchen fire. She arrived the next afternoon with a duffel bag, a tote full of toiletries, and the particular hollow look of someone who has cried so much their face has just given up on expressions entirely. I hugged her on the front step for a long time. Over her shoulder, I saw Ryan through the living room window, watching from the couch with his laptop open. He didn't come to the door. Dinner, that first night, was pasta I threw together quickly. Nothing special. Just something warm. Danny picked at hers. Ryan ate efficiently and then said, before I'd even started clearing plates, "I might just take this to the office. Conference call." There was no conference call scheduled that I knew of. He'd mentioned nothing that morning. But he picked up his bowl and his phone and disappeared down the hallway, and Danny watched him go with the careful blank expression of someone deciding not to say anything. "He's just busy," I said. She looked at me. She didn't say a word, but something in her eyes did. The next 3 days had a rhythm to them that made my stomach hurt. Ryan would emerge for coffee in the morning and scroll through his phone, while Danny and I talked at the kitchen table, not joining the conversation, not excusing himself from it, just existing in parallel like we were background noise. He'd come home from work and go directly to the office. One evening, Danny was curled up on the couch watching TV, and he stood in the doorway for a moment, visibly recalibrating, and then went to get water and retreated again without a word. The one time he did engage was at dinner on the third night, when Danny mentioned she'd been looking at apartments in her price range and was frustrated by what a one-bedroom ran for in our area. He looked up from his plate and said, "Well, the market's the market. Better to just rip the band-aid, find something, and get settled. Floating around doesn't help anyone." Then he went back to eating. Danny smiled a tight smile that didn't touch her eyes. Later, when she was in the shower, I found him in the kitchen. "That was a little harsh," I said. "What was?" Genuinely bewildered. He actually looked confused. "The floating around comment. She's been here 3 days. Her marriage just ended. She doesn't need a lecture on the rental market." He set down his glass. "I wasn't lecturing. I was being practical. You want me to just not say anything? I want you to be kind. I am being kind. I'm letting her stay here." He said it so calmly that for a second I almost believed there was no problem with it. The framing of it, letting her stay, hung in the air between us like something rotten. She left on a Thursday. Her college friend in Raleigh had offered her the spare room while she got sorted, and it was probably the better move anyway. Fresh city, fresh start. But she hugged me goodbye at the front door with that same grip that said more than she was saying out loud, and she looked at me for a second before she got in her car. "You good?" she asked, which was funny because she was the one leaving. "I'm great," I said. She nodded the slow nod of someone filing information away for later. After her taillights disappeared around the corner, I stood in the front hallway feeling like the air had been let out of everything. Ryan came up behind me and put his hand on my shoulder. "Okay," he said, with the exhale of a man whose long meeting had finally ended. "Back to normal." I didn't answer. I thought about that phrase a lot over the next few weeks. Back to normal. Like Danny had been an interruption. Like my sister in crisis. Sleeping in our guest room and trying to hold herself together had been an inconvenience to be managed and cleared away. I tried to talk to him about it once, the following Sunday morning. He listened with his arms crossed, and then told me I was reading into things, that he'd never said anything unkind to her directly, that he provided a roof and food, and what else did I want from him? The conversation ended with me feeling like I'd failed a logic test I didn't fully understand the rules of. I called my friend Priya after that. She'd never loved Ryan, had said so once, early on, in the careful way of someone who respects the relationship enough to only say it once. She listened to the whole thing without interrupting, and then she said very quietly, "He made your sister feel unwelcome in your home while she was in the worst week of her life. That's a fact. That happened. You don't need his permission to know that's wrong." I knew she was right. I wrote it down in the Notes app on my phone that night. Not sure why, just I wanted it somewhere that felt real. Ryan's mother was coming in November. Her name was Carol, and I knew from 4 years of marriage that Carol's visits were events. Not casual drop-ins, but productions, with itineraries and preferences and a gravitational pull that reorganized the entire household around itself. She visited twice a year, and every time Ryan became a different, lighter version of himself, more animated, quicker to laugh. I used to find it sweet. Lately, I found it something else. She confirmed the dates in October. 10 days, the week of Thanksgiving through the weekend after. Ryan told me with the energy of someone announcing a celebration. She already looked up to the good pie place on Maple, he said, which was his way of telling me to make sure the pie place on Maple happened. What followed was a transformation that I watched from what felt like a great distance. Ryan took 2 days off work to prepare. He deep cleaned the guest bathroom, the same guest bathroom Danny had used, which he'd described to me at the time as her mess to deal with. He bought Carol's specific brand of lactose-free creamer, the orange kind, 2 containers. He ordered a white noise machine because she'd mentioned once, 3 years ago, that street sounds bothered her. He made a restaurant reservation at a place downtown she'd said she wanted to try. He set up the TV in the guest room with her streaming subscriptions already logged in. I stood in the doorway of the guest room watching him arrange extra pillows on the bed, the good pillows, the ones usually in our closet, and something cold moved through me. "You bought her a white noise machine," I said. She mentioned the street noise. She mentioned it once. 3 years ago. He looked up. "Your point." I thought about Danny on our couch, careful and quiet, trying to take up as little space as possible. I thought about Ryan eating his pasta and disappearing down the hallway. "No point," I said, just noting it. Carol arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. Ryan picked her up from the airport alone. I had a client call that ran long, which he'd been fine with, or at least hadn't argued about. By the time I got home, they were already settled on the couch with wine, mid-conversation, and the apartment had the warm, particular glow of a welcome that had been carefully staged. "There she is," Carol said when I walked in, with the particular warmth she reserved for moments when she'd gotten a head start. She stood and gave me a hug that was correct in every mechanical sense. "You look tired, sweetheart. Work's been brutal." "It's been busy," I said. "It's good to see you." The first dinner was a restaurant Ryan had picked. Italian, nice, the kind of place with small portions and a long wine list. Carol ordered for the table with the authority of someone who considers it a gift. When my entree came and I mentioned it was a little salty, she said, "Oh, I think that's just their style. Very authentic. Ryan, remember the place we went in Florence?" And they were off, down a conversation that assumed my absence, and I sat and ate my salty pasta and smiled at the right moments. The second day, Ryan told me Carol wanted to see the Christmas market that had opened downtown. "She's been looking at it online," he said. "Can you take her? I've got back-to-backs until 4. I had a deadline at 2. I'd mentioned it that morning. "Ryan, I have the Hendrix copy due. Can you do it after? The market closes at 5, so do it before. It's copy, it's not surgery." I looked at him. He was already checking his phone. "Fine," I said, because the alternative was a conversation I didn't have the energy for. I took Carol to the Christmas market. She was pleasant in the way of someone who was always measuring. She commented on the vendor displays with authority, found two that met her standards, bought ornaments for herself and Ryan, and did not ask if I wanted anything. We got hot chocolate at a stand near the middle, and she said, watching the crowds, Ryan always worried he'd end up with someone too career-focused. You know how some women get they're so wrapped up in the professional identity that everything else suffers. She said it lightly, like small talk. It's so nice that you found a balance. I had not actually asked her opinion on my balance. I said, and drank my hot chocolate. That evening I started keeping a list. Not out of strategy, just because I felt like I was going quietly insane and I needed proof of what was real. November 18th, Ryan took Tuesday off to prep for Carol's visit. Did not take time off when Danny came. November 19th, bought white noise machine, lactose-free creamer, specific streaming logins. When Danny came, no preparation. November 20, took her to airport alone, had wine waiting. When Danny came, did not come to the door. November 21, rearranged my work deadline so I could escort Carol to the Christmas market. When Danny mentioned needing to find an apartment, he told her she was floating around. I kept adding to it. It became something I returned to in quiet moments, turning it over in my mind, the way you keep pressing a bruise. On the fourth day, Carol made a comment over breakfast about grandchildren. She didn't direct it at me exactly. She directed it at the kitchen, the way people do when they want plausible deniability. I saw the most adorable thing at the market yesterday, those little baby booties on the ornament stand. I almost bought them just in case. She laughed. Ryan laughed. I poured more coffee. Later she said in the same light voice, you know, I've always thought the early 30s are the sweet spot. Before it gets complicated. Medically, I mean. She smiled at me like she was doing me a favor. Something to consider while you have the luxury. Ryan, I noticed, said nothing. He was on his second cup of coffee and he said nothing. That night, I called Priya again. She listened and then she said, Okay, so the double standard is completely established. The question is what you want to do about it. I don't know. Yes, you do. I was quiet for a second. The thing is, I don't want to blow up the marriage over a guest room dynamic. The guest room dynamic, Priya said carefully, is just the display window. You know that. I did know that. I'd known it for a while, if I was honest. The list in my phone was only the most recent evidence. There were 4 years of smaller things underneath it. The way he'd described my promotion to his friends as Laurel's little work thing. The way my family's visits were always worked around his schedule, while his family's visits became our schedule. The way his preferences in the apartment were obvious and mine were negotiated. The way I'd been slowly rearranging myself around the shape of his comfort without quite noticing when it started. Carol's visit was a mirror. It showed me the architecture of something I'd been living in for a long time. I finished the list. I read it back to myself. Then I made a decision. 2 days before Thanksgiving, I told Ryan I wanted to host a small dinner. Just us and a few people. My friend Priya, his friend Marcus and Marcus's wife, our neighbours Jess and Tom, low-key, casual, a proper holiday thing. He liked the idea. He liked any idea that involved the apartment showing well, and he trusted me to handle the logistics, which I always did. I spent 2 days cooking, real cooking, brined turkey, homemade pie, 3 sides from scratch. Carol offered exactly 1 comment and 0 hands. Ryan told me the tablescape looked a little crowded and rearranged 2 of the candles. I said, thank you. The dinner started warm and easy. Marcus was funny. Priya kept things moving. Carol held court at one end of the table, and Ryan basked in the glow of being her son. And for the first 45 minutes, it was fine, it was almost good. The turn came when Marcus asked, genuinely just making conversation, whether my sister had gotten settled in Raleigh. She's doing really well, actually, I said. She found an apartment, started a new job. I'm proud of her. Oh, that's great, Marcus said. She was going through a hard time when she stayed with you guys, right? I looked down the table at Ryan. He was turning his wine glass. She was, I said. She needed a few days to regroup. Carol made a small, sympathetic sound. These things are so hard. Divorce is such a disruption. It was, I said. She was only here 5 days and she was so careful not to be in the way. I said it conversationally toward the middle of the table. I felt bad actually. She spent most of the time in the guest room because she didn't want to bother anyone. That's very considerate, Jess said. She is. She's always been like that. I picked up my wine. I think she could feel that the timing wasn't ideal. Ryan had a big proposal that week. Ryan's jaw tightened very slightly. Priya, who had been waiting for exactly this, said with perfect casual ease, "Well, that's life, right? You can't always time when people need you." She looked at Carol with a friendly smile. "It's so different when it's family." "Laurel worked so hard to make your visit special, Carol. I heard about the cooking prep, the errands. You must have felt so welcomed." Carol smiled, pleased. "I always do. Ryan and Laurel are wonderful hosts." "I know," Priya said warmly. And then, as if it had just occurred to her, "I guess it's different when it's a planned visit versus someone who just really needs you." "Laurel, your sister showed up kind of last minute, right? After everything happened." "The same day she called me," I said. "I told her to just come." "Oh, that's so—" Priya tilted her head. "How did that go, Ryan? I mean, that must have been an adjustment, someone arriving same day." The table had quieted in that particular way of people who can feel a current running under something. Ryan set down his wine glass. "We were happy to help," he said, and his voice was careful and correct. "Of course," Priya said agreeably. "And you took the time off and everything to get the room ready." "A beat too long. I had a busy week." "Right, the proposal. Of course." Priya nodded, looked at Marcus. "Men are so different, I think, about that stuff." Marcus would have had the room ready before she hung up the phone. "I absolutely would not have," Marcus said cheerfully, and everyone laughed, and the moment was papered over, but not before it had happened. Not before Carol had looked at her son with a small considering expression, not before Jess had caught my eye across the table with something that recognized what it had seen. Ryan didn't say anything to me until after everyone left. He was rinsing dishes, and he waited until Carol had gone to her room before he turned around. "What was that?" he said. "What was what?" "The whole thing with Priya. The back and forth about your sister." Priya was just asking questions. She was making a point, he said. "And so were you." "Don't pretend you weren't." He turned back to the sink. "I don't appreciate being made to feel guilty at my own Thanksgiving table for not throwing a parade when your sister showed up in crisis. I was trying to maintain some normalcy in our home." I dried a serving dish and put it away. "You bought your mum a white noise machine. That's not comparable." "You took Tuesday off to clean the bathroom she'd be using." "My mum visits twice a year. It's a whole trip for her. It's different." "Different," I said. "How?" He turned around again. His voice dropped into that particular register, the patient, explaining voice, the one that always made me feel like I'd raised a concern in an inappropriate meeting. "My mother is a guest, an invited guest with a planned visit. Your sister showing up with no notice in the middle of my work crunch is a different category of situation. Hosting isn't just, it's not infinite. It has limits, and those limits deserve respect." "She was there 5 days," I said. "She slept in our guest room, and she barely ate, and she apologized every time she needed something." "I know that. And I didn't say anything to her directly, did I? I kept the peace. I let her be there." "Let her be there." I heard Priya's voice in my head. "The guest room is just the display window." "I've been keeping a list," I said almost to myself. He frowned. "What? A list? Since Danny's visit? Everything I've done for your mum's stay versus everything you did for hers." I looked at him. "You want to hear it?" He looked at me like I'd said something in another language. "Why would you do that? Why would you keep a list like that?" "Because I needed to see it," I said simply. "In writing." We didn't talk much after that. He went to bed. I stayed in the kitchen for a long time, the list open on my phone, reading it in the dark. Carol left the following Monday. The goodbye was warm on her side and careful on mine. She hugged me at the door and said, "You take such good care of him," which I think was meant kindly. After the car pulled away, Ryan came back in looking lighter, the way he always did in the first hours after Carol's visits, unburdened, like something had been set down. He kissed my cheek. "Good Thanksgiving," he said. "Ryan," I said, "I want to talk." We sat at the kitchen table. I had the list on my phone. I also had on my phone the recording I'd made during our conversation the night of the dinner, a recording of him saying, "Let her be there," of him explaining my sister in the language of inconvenience and limits. I had a year of notes. I had a friend who was a paralegal and who had, when I'd called her 2 nights ago, walked me through what I needed to know about the process. I didn't lead with the recording. I led with the list. I read it to him item by item, quietly, while he sat across from me with his face doing the sequence of things his face did, the initial patience, the slight irritation, the shifting into contempt. When I finished, he said, "So what do you want?" "An apology." "No," I said. "I want a divorce." He laughed. Actually laughed, the short disbelieving kind. "Because I didn't prep the guest room for your sister. Because I've been living in your hierarchy for 4 years and I just figured out that's what it was." I picked up my phone. I have a recording of you telling me you let her be there. I have texts from around her visit where you described her to your brother as Laurel's drama. I have a list that documents, with dates, the difference in how you treat my family versus yours. My attorney, I watched something shift in his face at the word attorney, has reviewed all of it. He was very still. "You talked to an attorney 3 days ago, while my mother was here, while I was thinking clearly," I said. "He tried several things after that. He tried the reasonable voice, the we can work on this voice, then the you're being dramatic voice, and briefly the this is what Pryor's been putting in your head voice, which told me I'd correctly predicted the playbook." I sat and listened to all of it. I had learned over the past month how to wait while he finished speaking. When he was done, I placed a folder on the table. Inside was a printout from my attorney, preliminary paperwork, a draft of the separation agreement she put together based on what I described. I watched him open it. I watched him read his own name on the top line. "We don't own property together," I said, "so that's not complicated. The joint account gets split. I'll keep my car, you keep yours. She thinks it's straightforward." He put the folder down. He looked, for the first time in 4 years, but he didn't know what to do with his face. "You planned this," he said. "I prepared," I said. "There's a difference." He didn't sign that night. He needed a week, his own attorney, a back and forth I mostly stayed out of because I'd been told to let the lawyers talk. During that week he texted me things that ran the full, predictable range. Anger first, then bargaining wrapped in the language of insight, then a brief period of what looked like genuine grief, and then silence, which was new. I screenshotted everything. My attorney called it a gift. He signed on a grey Thursday in January. I was at my sister's apartment in Raleigh when my attorney sent the confirmation email. Danny had made coffee and she handed me a mug when I looked up from my phone. "Done," she said. "Done." She sat down across from me at her new table in her new apartment, with its bare walls and its still bare feeling that was becoming something else, slowly, day by day. She wrapped her hands around her own mug. "How do you feel?" I thought about the question. Outside the window, Raleigh in January was bare trees and grey sky and a cold, clean quality of light. I felt light in the way of a room that has been opened after being shut for a long time. A little raw. A little stunned by the air. "I feel like I just stopped explaining myself," I said. She nodded. She understood exactly what I meant. I went back to the city and I moved into a one-bedroom in a neighborhood I'd always liked, but Ryan had found uninteresting. My first night there, I slept on an air mattress because my bed frame hadn't arrived yet, and I woke up to the sound of the street outside with no one next to me, and the thought that appeared, without any drama at all, in the first quiet seconds of the morning: "I am so glad I'm here." My sister called on a Sunday 2 months later, laughing before she even said hello. She'd run into a mutual acquaintance from back home who'd recently bumped into Ryan at a work event. Apparently, he was telling people we'd grown apart, that it had been mutual, that these things happen. The acquaintance had nodded and then mentioned that she'd had coffee with me recently and I seemed absolutely wonderful. "He's rewriting it," Danny said. "You know that, right? He's the one who grew." "Let him," I said. I was standing in my kitchen in my new apartment making pasta. A real mess of a recipe I'd found online and was trying for the first time, and the counter was dusted with flour, and it was entirely my problem to clean up. "It doesn't bother you?" I thought about it honestly. There was a version of me not very far back who would have needed him to admit it, who would have needed the acknowledgement, the moment of his understanding the harm. I'd spent time wanting that. But the wanting had quietly resolved, somewhere between the attorney's office and the air mattress and this kitchen, into something simpler. Not really, I said. The people who were in the room know what happened. She was quiet for a second. Then, yeah, they do. My neighbour Priya came over for dinner that Friday. We ate the pasta, which turned out fine, better than fine, and drank the good wine and talked until midnight about the things women talk about when they no longer have to manage anyone's feelings but their own. At some point she said, "I'm proud of you, you know, for keeping the list, for being so quiet about it and so deliberate." I was terrified, I said honestly, the whole time. Terrified and deliberate, she said. That's actually the best kind of brave. I thought about that after she left, washing the dishes in the quiet apartment that smelled like garlic and the candles I'd bought because I liked them, with no one to tell me the tablescape was crowded. I thought about Danny driving to Raleigh with her duffel bag and her hollow face, and how she'd asked me, "You good at the door?" and how I'd said yes when I'd meant something closer to, I don't know yet. I knew now. The list was still on my phone. I kept meaning to delete it. The way you keep meaning to delete old photos that don't make you feel bad anymore, just finished. One day I will, but not yet. For now it stays where it is, a small, careful record of the moment I stopped pressing the bruise to feel it, and started pressing it to finally, completely understand what had happened. I still have the list on my phone. I keep meaning to delete it, and then I don't. It's not a long list. Maybe 15 entries, spread across a few weeks. Dates, observations, specific words. Let her be there. The white noise machine. The 2 containers of lactose-free creamer. The Christmas market I rescheduled my deadline for. Small things, individually. The kind of things that, if you showed them to someone out of context, might not look like much. But context is everything. Context is actually the whole point. What I've come to understand, not quickly and not without some pain, is that how someone treats the people you love when there's nothing in it for them tells you more about who they are than almost anything else. Ryan was never cruel to Danny directly. He never raised his voice, never said anything she could have quoted back to me as evidence. He was simply absent in every way that mattered, and he did it while being meticulously present for his own mother. That gap, that specific and deliberate gap, was its own kind of answer. I just needed long enough to read it. I think about Danny a lot, actually. She showed up at my door with a duffel bag and a hollow face, and she was so careful not to need too much. She apologized for existing in the guest room, and I watched my husband eat his pasta and disappear down the hallway, and I told her he was just busy, and some part of me knew even then that I was lying, not to her, to myself. That's the thing about clarity. It doesn't always arrive like a lightning bolt. Sometimes it accumulates. Sometimes it's a list. Sometimes it's a white noise machine sitting on a shelf in the guest room that your husband bought for his mother while your sister was out there sleeping on her college friend's couch, trying to figure out how to start over. And one day the list is just long enough that you can't explain it away anymore. What took me so long, I think, was that I kept trying to be fair. I kept trying to find the reading of events that made him reasonable. I'm not sure that's a character flaw exactly. Wanting to believe the best of someone you chose is not the worst instinct a person can have, but there's a version of fairness that crosses over into something else, into a willingness to negotiate with your own perception until you can't see clearly anymore. I stayed in that place longer than I should have. What got me out wasn't anger in the end. It was something quieter, the decision to take my own observations seriously, to treat what I had seen and felt and written down as real information, not as overreaction. That sounds small. It didn't feel small. I'm in my own apartment now. I made pasta last week and left flour on the counter and didn't clean it up until the next morning because I was tired and it was only my problem. I have a list of exactly 0 things I'm required to do to make someone else comfortable at the expense of my own family. And I have my sister, who drove 4 hours to be with me when I needed her, the same way I once told her to get in the car and just come. We take care of each other. We always have. It just took me a while to remember that was allowed to be enough.